In the early hours of June 13th, 1942, while most Americans slept believing the Atlantic Ocean kept the war safely an ocean away, a German U-boat surfaced just off the coast of Long Island, New York. The men who climbed out were not soldiers in uniform. They wore civilian clothes, carried American cash, and spoke fluent English. They were not here to fight on a battlefield. They were here to disappear into the United States and quietly tear the country apart from the inside. This was not rumor, exaggeration, or wartime paranoia. Nazi Germany had successfully landed a sabotage team on American soil. The operation was real, carefully planned, and approved at the highest levels of the Third Reich. It was called Operation Pastorius, and for a brief moment in World War II, the continental United States became an active enemy theater. By the spring of 1942, Germany faced a strategic problem. The United States had entered the war after Pearl Harbor, and American factories were beginning to transform the nation into an industrial powerhouse. Ships, planes, tanks, aluminum, fuel, and ammunition flowed out of American plants at a scale Germany could not match. The German Navy could harass shipping, but it could not stop production itself. Adolf Hitler and German intelligence leaders concluded that if America could not be defeated militarily, it could be weakened economically. The plan was bold and dangerous. Instead of bombing factories from the air, Germany would destroy them from within. Power stations, railroads, bridges, aluminum plants, and industrial facilities would be sabotaged quietly and repeatedly. Fires, explosions, and shutdowns would disrupt production and force resources to be diverted to domestic security. Even more important, the psychological impact would be enormous. If Americans realized the war had followed them home, confidence would fracture. German intelligence selected 8 men for the mission. They were not random volunteers. All had lived in the United States before the war. They spoke English without heavy accents. They understood American culture, geography, and habits. Several had held jobs, rented apartments, and blended in easily during their previous time in the country. These men were trained in sabotage techniques, explosives, timing devices, and covert communication. They memorized detailed target lists and received strict instructions to operate independently once ashore. Their leader was George John Dash, a German who had lived in America for years and knew how easily a foreigner could disappear in a large city. Another key operative was Ernst Berger, a veteran of World War I. The remaining men were divided into 2 teams of 4, each assigned a separate landing point and set of targets. They were issued American dollars, false identification, civilian clothing, and explosives disguised to evade casual inspection. German U-boats would carry them across the Atlantic, land them at night, and then vanish back into the ocean. From there, the saboteurs would travel inland by train and bus, blend into civilian life, and begin their campaign weeks later. They were ordered not to act immediately. The goal was long-term disruption, not a single spectacular attack. On the night of June 12th, 1942, U-202 surfaced near Amagansett, Long Island. The shoreline was dark and quiet. The 4 men paddled ashore in a rubber raft carrying crates of explosives and supplies. They wore German naval uniforms during the landing so they could claim prisoner of war status if captured on the beach. Once ashore, they buried the uniforms and equipment in the sand and changed into civilian clothes. The landing nearly failed within minutes. A Coast Guard patrolman named John Cullen encountered the group while walking the beach. Dash attempted to bluff his way out of the situation, claiming they were fishermen. When that failed, he tried bribery, offering Cullen money to forget what he had seen. Cullen pretended to accept, then immediately reported the encounter. By the time authorities returned, the saboteurs had already left the area and disappeared into the night. Despite the close call, the mission continued. The men boarded trains and began moving toward New York City, carrying enough explosives to cripple major industrial targets. Just days later, a second U-boat landed another 4-man team in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. That landing went undetected. By mid-June 1942, 8 trained Nazi saboteurs were loose inside the United States. On paper, Operation Pastorius was a serious threat. The targets were real. The explosives were powerful, and American defenses were not yet fully prepared for internal sabotage. But beneath the surface, the mission was already beginning to crack. Fear, doubt, and disagreement simmered among the men almost immediately. Some had joined for money or adventure. Others harbored resentment toward the Nazi regime itself. The reality of executing attacks on civilian infrastructure inside a country they once lived in weighed heavily on them. As the saboteurs dispersed into American cities, one man in particular began to unravel. The success of the mission depended on silence, discipline, and patience. What followed instead would determine whether Operation Pastorius became one of the most devastating acts of sabotage in American history or a near disaster quietly buried by the government. By the time the saboteurs reached New York City, the greatest danger to the mission was no longer the FBI or the Coast Guard. It was coming from inside the operation itself. The discipline demanded by German intelligence began collapsing almost immediately, replaced by fear, suspicion, and regret. George John Dash, the designated leader of the Long Island team, was the first to break. The encounter with the Coast Guard patrolman on the beach had shaken him deeply. What had been presented during training as a clean, controlled insertion now felt reckless and fragile. Dash understood something the others did not yet fully grasp. Once sabotage began, there would be no escape, no quiet surrender, and no mercy. The United States was not an occupied country. Any captured saboteur would face execution. As the men settled into New York hotels and apartments, Dash began drinking heavily. He argued with Ernst Berger, who openly despised the Nazi regime and had previously been imprisoned by it before agreeing to join the mission. The two men reached a private understanding that they would not carry out any attacks. But the other members of the team remained committed to their orders, at least outwardly. The longer Dash waited, the more he feared he would lose control of the situation entirely. Within days of landing, Dash made a decision that stunned even Berger. He would turn himself in to the American authorities and expose the entire operation. On June 19, 1942, Dash walked into the FBI field office in New York City and asked to speak to an agent. At first, he was dismissed as a crank. His story sounded implausible, the kind of delusion that arrived daily during wartime hysteria. But Dash insisted. He provided names, details, and described the Long Island landing with precision. When that still failed to convince them, he pulled nearly $84,000 in cash from his bag, money provided by German intelligence, and dumped it onto the desk. That moment changed everything. The FBI immediately escalated the case. Dash was taken into custody and interrogated intensively. He revealed the names of all 8 saboteurs, their landing locations, their planned targets, and their movements. Crucially, he also disclosed the Florida landing, which American authorities had not detected at all. The scale of the threat became unmistakable. Under the direction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a nationwide manhunt began, conducted in near total secrecy. The government feared that public disclosure would cause panic and potentially warn the remaining saboteurs. Agents quietly monitored train stations, hotels, boarding houses, and phone records. Surveillance teams followed leads across multiple states. One by one, the saboteurs were located and arrested without gunfire or public confrontation. Some were captured in New York. Others were found in Chicago and Cincinnati, cities they had reached while attempting to establish cover identities. Explosives, timers, blueprints, and coded instructions were recovered. Every arrest confirmed that Dash's story was accurate. The Florida team, which had landed undetected and believed the mission was proceeding normally, never realized how completely they had been compromised. When FBI agents finally arrived, the arrests were swift and final. None of the saboteurs managed to carry out a single act of sabotage. By early July 1942, all 8 men were in custody. The danger had been neutralized before the public ever knew it existed, but a new problem now confronted the U.S. government. These were enemy agents captured on American soil, wearing civilian clothes, planning attacks against civilian infrastructure. They did not fit neatly into the civilian criminal system or traditional prisoner of war categories. The question was no longer whether the United States had stopped a Nazi sabotage operation. The question now was how justice would be carried out and under what authority. The answer would set a precedent that still echoes through American law today. With all 8 saboteurs in custody, the United States now faced a decision that went far beyond punishment. How these men were tried would shape American law, national security policy, and the government's wartime authority for decades to come. President Franklin D. Roosevelt moved quickly, convinced that the civilian court system was not equipped to handle the case. Roosevelt believed the saboteurs were unlawful enemy combatants. They had entered the country secretly in civilian clothes with the intent to destroy civilian infrastructure. Under the laws of war, that distinction mattered. If tried in civilian court, the men would receive jury trials, public hearings, and lengthy appeals. Roosevelt feared this would expose sensitive intelligence methods and signal weakness to both enemies and allies. He wanted speed, secrecy, and finality. Within days, Roosevelt ordered that the men be tried by a military tribunal, not a civilian court. The decision was controversial even inside the government. Some legal advisors warned that bypassing the civilian justice system could set a dangerous precedent. Others argued that wartime demanded extraordinary measures. Roosevelt overruled objections and personally approved the structure of the tribunal. The trial was conducted in secret inside the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. The public had no idea it was happening. The defendants were denied jury trials and instead faced a panel of military officers. Evidence was overwhelming. Explosives, plans, confessions, and testimony left no doubt about their intent. The question was not guilt, it was punishment. The defense challenged the legality of the tribunal, arguing that the Constitution guaranteed the right to a civilian trial. The case was rushed to the Supreme Court, which agreed to hear arguments immediately. In a landmark decision, the court ruled that unlawful enemy combatants could be tried by military tribunal, even when captured on U.S. soil. The ruling affirmed Roosevelt's authority and permanently altered how the United States would handle wartime sabotage and terrorism cases. With the legal question settled, the tribunal delivered its verdict. 6 of the 8 men were sentenced to death by electrocution. The remaining 2, George John Dash and Ernst Berger, received prison sentences due to their cooperation. On August 8, 1942, the 6 condemned saboteurs were executed at the District of Columbia jail. The executions were carried out quietly, without public announcement or ceremony. Only after the threat was fully neutralized did the government reveal Operation Pastorius to the American public. Newspapers reported the story as a stunning but contained victory. The fact that the saboteurs had been stopped before causing any damage reassured the nation. What remained hidden, however, was just how close the mission had come to succeeding. Behind the scenes, J. Edgar Hoover moved swiftly to shape the narrative. The FBI emphasized its investigative skill and downplayed the role of Dash's voluntary confession. Hoover wanted the public to believe the Bureau had uncovered the plot through superior intelligence work, not luck or betrayal. The truth was more complicated, but the myth endured. Operation Pastorius changed America. It exposed vulnerabilities in coastal defense, immigration monitoring, and internal security. It led directly to expanded counterintelligence programs and increased surveillance authority during wartime. It also created legal foundations that would later be cited during conflicts far removed from World War II. Most Americans never felt the danger because the danger was stopped before it could be seen, but in the summer of 1942, the United States came closer than many realized to a coordinated sabotage campaign launched from within its own borders. The war was not just overseas. For a brief moment, it was already here. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.